This last several days have been notable, to say the least, and notable in a way that we want to take a few minutes to get some particular expertise on what has been happening, particularly in regard to the recent actions, the president's actions with regard to immigration into this country. And as I was thinking about, as a watcher of the world and watching what was happening, I thought, how do we stay engaged? And quickly realized I didn't have to ask that question because we had somebody here who could actually really speak to what's going on. So we're very fortunate to have Professor Caitlin Barry to talk with us at this pop-up. To introduce it, though, I just wanted to say a couple of things that I was thinking about that matter to us here in this building particularly and on this campus. And I think about our university, a Catholic Augustinian university, where I know that the values of the university writ large are so concerned with how we take care of others and how we welcome others into our world. Something which I know we've spoken about in this building many times, and I've tried to stress to each and every one of you the importance of how we treat each other. And that, I think, reflects the broader vision of us as a university and our concern for how we welcome others and how we treat those who come from outside of our community and welcome them in. I also think about how our university was founded, as we are in our, let me see if I get this right, demi-semi-sept-centennial. Yes, that is the word for 175th anniversary. So as we celebrate the demi-semi-sept-centennial, we are reflecting on what got those 8 Augustinians in 1842 to think of founding this school. And one of the biggest motivating, or perhaps the biggest motivating factor, was educating Irish American immigrants who were excluded from all the privileges that others in society had, including higher education. So our university was founded on a premise of bringing in people who had been excluded, offering opportunity to those from outside of the borders originally, and to seeing what we could do to provide opportunity. So when I think about our university, I know how much this conversation matters. And then when I think about what we are doing as a law school and who we are as lawyers, and I know there's some non-lawyers in the building as well, but as lawyers, I always want to make sure that everyone understands the importance of our role in society in keeping order. And this transcends this particular issue, but we have to always ask ourselves, what do we do to keep order in society, to maintain the structure of our government, to maintain what has worked for 200 plus years and to keep it going? How we keep order matters, and how each of us as lawyers can make a difference in that world. And as we train the lawyers in this room, I want us all to remember we have a role to play institutionally in how our government and our system works. So those things I think about our institution, our profession, and frankly, our great university. And so I am particularly pleased that we have somebody today who can speak to all of those things, who has been in the forefront of the most, certainly, an extraordinarily challenging that is not just local to the Philadelphia area, not to Pennsylvania, not just to the nation, but to the world. Without more, I will welcome somebody who has been an extraordinary member of our community for several years, starting out in the clinics, and now actually, not just as a fellow, but now our own Professor Caitlin Barry. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and I am so incredibly encouraged by the turnout today and by so many new faces who are in the room today, who I hope to meet and be sharing space and sharing stories with as we move forward. I do want to open just by making it very clear, I am not a refugee scholar. We are lucky enough at Villanova to have a refugee scholar. Professor Pistone is here. Professor Pistone is going to be able to speak much more eloquently than I am about the ins and outs of the refugee laws and how they are wholesale under attack under the new administration. So I can speak to what happened over the weekend. My participation is not the most thrilling tale, and as I am always saying, lawyers' participation is just a drop in the bucket of a much broader movement that is what really drives change. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit as well. So I'll just go through the details of what went over this weekend, and then maybe we can have a short discussion. Unfortunately, we have to end at 1, but I'm not going anywhere, right? I'll be here. We can continue the conversation this afternoon and as we move forward. So to start out with, as I'm sure you know, Friday night, there was an executive order that was issued, although it's very unclear in what manner it was issued. It still has not been made publicly available. I was just on the White House website just before I left my office a few minutes ago. It still has not been published anywhere. So it was leaked to the press, but we're unclear where or how it exists. It was an order that barred the entry of anyone from a list of 7 countries. I'm sure you've all seen the list. And it was put into effect immediately. So Friday night, overnight, any individual who was not a US citizen, who was from one of those 7 countries, was stopped at the US airport and was attempted, the Customs and Border Protection attempted to force them onto flights to other countries. So this included refugees, this included people with green cards, this included students who had been traveling abroad. There was a really eloquent piece that was written by a PhD student at Columbia who is now stuck outside of the United States, who was forced to go back in transit over the weekend. It included people who were coming here on tourist visas to visit family members, and I'll tell you some details about some of the families who were stopped in Philadelphia. So the order was issued on Friday night, and overnight it was put into place. At the Philadelphia airport, the first that we in the immigration lawyer community heard about it was when we saw the news report about the 6 Syrian Christian family members who had been met at the airport getting off of a flight and were then forced onto a flight back to Qatar. Qatar is where a lot of connecting flights are made for people who are traveling from all over the world. So most people who were on the flight from Qatar were not actually from Qatar, they were changing planes there. I'm sure some of you saw some of the details in the media about that family. Did anyone want to share what they read about that family? Want to shout it out? Does anyone know how long they had been waiting to be reunited with their family here? Sorry, what? 15 years. They'd been waiting for 15 years to be reunited with their family here. So there's a family of US citizens who have ancestors from Syria who live in Allentown. One member of the family had filed for his 2 brothers to bring them to the United States. It took 15 years for the visas to be processed. They were entering the United States as lawful permanent residents, as green card holders. And they were stopped at the airport with all of their family members. And they were then forced onto a plane to return. The family were at the airport waiting for them, right? And now we're learning that although that family, their situation was heavily covered in the media, partially because the family spoke up and contacted media and lawyers, we're now learning that there were other people in that same group who were turned around and forced back onto a flight before anyone knew. So Saturday afternoon, I was starting to hear from more and more people in the immigration lawyer community about the situation and received a call from Shoba Wadia, who runs the Center for Immigrants' Rights in Penn State, who had been contacted by a family who were waiting to be reunited with family members after a connecting flight and had received a call from Homeland Security informing them that their family member would instead be forced back onto a plane. And so Shoba called me and said, can you do this? And so I got in the car and drove down to the airport on Saturday night. On my way to the airport, don't tell the state police, but I got up my cell phone. I called Customs and Border Protection and said, I'm representing this individual. I would like to be able to meet with them. I'd like to file my entry of appearance, and I'd like to know under what jurisdiction they're being held. and I was told that my client had no right to counsel. He would not be given access to attorneys. He would not be permitted to speak with family members. He was being put back on a plane on Sunday morning. It had been scheduled, and that there was nothing we could do about it. So at that point, obviously I'm thinking it's time to circle the wagons, and so I reached out to a number of other attorneys who said, go back to your office, write a declaration about what just happened, that you were denied access to your client. We'll send other attorneys to the airport to try to keep advocating to get in. So this is where the really sexy part starts. I went back to the office. I went back to the office of a friend who has an office downtown, who was working on preparing a habeas petition, where we stayed until about 2 in the morning. We were waiting to hear from the local AUSAs as to their position on a habeas that would be filed, arguing that they were being detained in violation of their rights to due process. At that point, we had learned that they had been taken from the airport to a county jail. We later learned that they were put into the general population at the jail, that they were strip searched and placed into cells with other people in prison. And so I was continuously in contact with the family that I was working for, who've asked not to share any identifying information, so I'm not going to tell you more about their story. But I was also in contact with a second family of a woman who lives in Michigan. She and her children had arrived in the United States a few months ago pursuant to a special immigrant visa, which is a visa that is given to people primarily from Iraq who have served as interpreters or other contractors with the US military. She had worked in that position for many years in Iraq. She began to receive death threats against her and her family for collaborating with the US military. She applied for the visa. They waited 3 years. They went through 7 different background checks. They finally received their visas, but in that waiting time, her husband's passport had expired. And from what she explained to me, in Iraq, it takes 6 months to renew a passport. So she and the children decided to leave. As soon as his passport was renewed, he got on a plane to join them and was met at the US airport by Homeland Security, who then took him to jail. So I was also in contact with that family. We were primarily arguing for access, just to be able to get in and interview people to find out. We understood that they all had valid visas and had gone through extensive background checks, and in many cases had been waiting for years. But we also wanted to know if they had an additional fear of return that would allow us to bring additional arguments as to why they should be released. We were never given access to any of the individuals. We got a call at about 1 in the morning on Saturday that they were all just going to be released, brought back to the airport on Sunday morning, and just released. And the next call that I got was from the families of the 2 individuals who said, I just spoke to them. They're just walking around the airport now, about to get on their flight. And then we confirmed later, they all got on their connecting flights and were reunited with their families. I mean, it's the twilight zone, right? Within 24 hours, going from, being treated like the most dangerous criminal in the world to then they're just brought back and allowed to walk through the airport. I was incredibly lucky to be a part of the legal team that worked so hard on Saturday night. The ACLU of Pennsylvania really went to bat and is continuing to go to bat for these individuals, along with a team of private attorneys who did all of that work pro bono. We'll continue to do all of that work pro bono. Get ready. There's about to be 47 more press conferences this week talking about ongoing legal action that is going to be brought. There was a temporary restraining order that was issued by a judge in Brooklyn on Saturday night, which many of you probably saw. The restraining order prevented Homeland Security from forcibly removing anyone who was stopped at the airport pursuant to the ban. It did not overturn the ban, right? Is everybody clear on that? The ban remains in place. So people are being stopped from getting on to their flights abroad. The ban is only going to impact people who were already in the United States, really who were in transit while the ban was in place. And we're hearing more and more stories of people who are not only being stopped at the airport, but interrogated, harassed, strip searched. I just read a story of a man who was pulled out of line waiting for a flight in Qatar, and during his interview, when he refused to respond to questions, beaten. So this is obviously a very serious situation. Were any of you at the airport this weekend, Saturday night or Sunday? A few hands. I just want to make it really, really clear that what happened this weekend was an incredible groundswell of support. There were thousands and thousands of people who turned out at the airport this weekend. The mayor of Philadelphia, the governor of Pennsylvania, a number of different members of Congress were there. In addition to people who walked away from dinner, I talked to a man who left a father-daughter dance, people who dropped whatever they were doing to go and be of support. And in addition to the incredibly powerful leadership that we have in Pennsylvania from immigrant communities who organized a lot of these marches and organized this support. And I think that's the reason why Philadelphia was so successful in obtaining the release of the individuals who were stopped. As some of you may have seen, that was not the outcome in other areas. In DC, people are still in detention. We heard a rumor that they may even be taken to the detention center in Reading, Pennsylvania, where they are detaining refugee families. For those of you who don't know, there's a detention center in Reading that has been in operation for many, many years, where right now there are 100 refugee family members there in detention, including children. And there are some rumors that some of the families that were stopped this weekend are going to be sent there. We haven't confirmed that yet. Which is all to say, we need to take a few steps back and look at what has been going on in the broader context of the attack on immigrants' rights in the United States. On constitutional rights, because the rights that are being asserted are rights that people are entitled to under the Constitution, right? As people residing here in the United States. And just think about, this is part of a much bigger attack on these communities. Some of you may have seen, there's a family living in sanctuary at Arch Street United Methodist Church in Philadelphia. A father of several U.S. citizen children who they are actively trying to deport, who took physical sanctuary in a church. And I was thinking of, his name's Javier, I was thinking of Javier this weekend when we were at the airport, that moving forward, we need to find ways to unite all of these struggles and be thinking about how the next steps that we take forward bring everyone along with us and that no one is left behind. And I think that the way that we're going to do that is by thinking about how my life, my individual life, is impacted by the kinds of actions that we saw this weekend, right? Not just in, taking up my time, which was, again, mostly sitting around in office, working on cases like this, but that my community suffers when people's rights are not protected. My community suffers when people are not permitted to remain in their homes, right? Our university suffers when people are not allowed to come here from other countries on student visas. Our faculty suffers when we're not allowed to invite scholars from other countries to come and speak with us. We suffer as a much broader community. And so even for those of us who have the privilege of having US citizenship, who were lucky enough to be born here, I think this is an attack on us. This is an attack on what we value and what we care about. And so I think it's so fantastic that everyone turned out today to talk about this. I think what happened this weekend was obviously atrocious, but I'm also trying to remind myself this is going to be a marathon, right? Not a sprint. So what the victory that we had yesterday, yesterday morning, all of us were, Saturday night we were all on email until 3 in the morning. I got up Sunday at 7 and checked my email, and there was already a string of emails saying, how are we getting those Syrian Christian family members back? And so that's the next step, right? So it's not going to end. It's just going to keep going. I want to thank so many of you who emailed over the weekend asking how you can help. I think we are in a moment of extreme chaos right now in a lot of different directions, but there will be many opportunities to help. And so I think once we have some more clarity on those specifically, but I would encourage all of you to get connected with the organizations that are supporting and providing community space for the people who are being directly impacted by these orders. I'm seeing some faces that I saw over the weekend at some really fantastic opportunities to learn more about what the New Sanctuary Movement is doing, about what Juntos is doing, which is a social justice organization in South Philadelphia. Jewish Voice for Peace organized was part of the organizing the event at the airport this weekend, and creating incredible community for people to see the connections here. Because we have to remember, Friday was International Holocaust Remembrance Day, right? That was the day that this order was issued. So we have to remember how connected all of these struggles are, and find ways to keep having those conversations. So I guess we can have some questions for a few minutes. Yep.
I can just yell.
Sure.
If I may co-opt your speech for just a minute, if you are looking for opportunities to plug in right away, Wakar and Fatin and Siobhan, who's not here, and I have all been trying to revive the Villanova chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. Our general meeting's Thursday. One of the immediate things you can do is get trained to be a legal observer. If you're at a protest, you might see people in bright green hats. They're there to observe what's happening. If people are arrested, they help do jail support. They make sure that different officials are following the rules about what they're supposed to do. If you're interested in that, come to the meeting. We can schedule a training. It's something small, but it's very necessary, and there's a call going out for legal observers all across the state. So that's one quick thing you can do to get involved, and stay tuned for appointments so you can get involved.
Ever didn't say what time it is.
What time is the meeting ever?
It is at noon. We just got the room. It's at noon on Thursday in room 303.
All right, so noon on Thursday. 303, there will be food. Fantastic. And I will say, several of the attorneys who were working so tirelessly this weekend are longtime supporters of the National Lawyers Guild, and it can be a great way to find out more about what's going on in the area, for sure. Yeah.
How is this being a temporary order throw a wrench into it?
So how does it being a temporary order throw a wrench into it? So I will say that was only one of many, many orders that were issued this weekend across the country. There was an order that was also issued instructing Customs and Border Protection to provide access to counsel. And there was an order in a district court in California specifically ordering the return of a family in the exact same situation as the family who returned away in Philadelphia on Saturday morning. So, I mean, the speed with which legal advocates were able to respond was really, really incredibly impressive. And again, I think was largely because there was such an outpouring of support and pressure that was being placed. Walking into the courtroom, I think the fact that many of the judges were already so educated on these issues had everything to do with the growth of the immigrant justice movement in the United States. So the fact that it's a temporary order just means that they are going to be battling this out in court. The temporary restraining order will remain in place. If anyone wants to take a look at it, I mean, the finding in the order was that the applicants were, the judge found that it was highly likely that they will succeed on a claim that this violates their due process rights under the Equal Protection Clause. Right?
Aren't you meeting with the president that appears on you about declaring Villanova sanctuary?
Thank you. There's our plant. Thank you, Joe. No meeting has been scheduled. We have been in a conversation about what our university can do to offer protection to its students, and the conversation's ongoing, I think is all I can say at this point. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So the temporary restraining order that was issued in Brooklyn on Saturday night did apply across the country because it was issued in a federal court. But it only prevented the removal of people who had been stopped at the airport. It did not order their release. So that was why we were still working into the night on Saturday. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes. Yeah. Right. 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 Sure. So I will say, all right, so while we have our refugee experts sitting here, sanctuary cities are my bread and butter, and if anyone wants to have an 8-hour conversation about sanctuary cities, you know where to find me. And if folks are interested, we could do another pop-up discussion at some point about the idea of a sanctuary city. So just to very briefly answer your question, and as was made obvious this weekend, there is absolutely nothing that a city or a university can do to prevent someone from being deported if the government is seeking to deport them, right? The city of Philadelphia does not, people are deported within the city of Philadelphia every single day. City of Philadelphia can't control whether or not federal immigration law is enforced within its jurisdiction. What they are calling a sanctuary policy is an agreement under which local police will not be interrogating people about their immigration status and holding people solely for the purpose of facilitating deportation under civil immigration laws. It's a very, very narrow type of agreement. Shay, I appreciate you for talking about violent felons. For those of you who don't know, my former career was in assisting people who had been convicted of violent crimes from asserting their right to remain in the United States. My approach to these cases is that everyone has the right to turn their lives around. Everyone has the right to seek rehabilitation and rebuild. Everyone has the right to a second chance. So I spent a large part of my career assisting people in that situation. So if anyone wants to get into the nitty-gritty of sanctuary policies, I'd be happy to talk to it. But I think what happened in Philadelphia this weekend, and what happened across the city, or across the country, made it very clear, a sanctuary policy does not prevent Homeland Security from deporting someone, right? As we're sitting here right now, Homeland Security is in Philadelphia removing people from their homes and forcibly deporting them, right? So if folks have other questions, I'm happy to talk about that as well, but that might be a really fun separate conversation to have just about sanctuary policies, since they were also very much targeted by one of the actions that was issued earlier last week. I know some of you have to get to class. If folks have other questions or would like to continue the conversation in any other way, please feel free to come and find me. Thanks so much for coming out.